The emergency beacon pierced through the void of space like a desperate scream, its signal cascading across light years in mere moments through the quantum communication network. On the bridge of the Earth Federation flagship Prometheus, Admiral Sarah Chun stood motionless as the translation algorithms worked to decode the alien transmission. The crew around her maintained their positions, but tension filled the air like electricity before a storm. "Signal decoded, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the communication station. His voice carried an unusual tremor that made Chen's jaw tighten. It's from a Volari collective." A collective intake of breath swept across the bridge. The Volari were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most peaceful species ever encountered. Their homeworld of Valaris Prime was considered a sanctuary world, a place where diplomatic negotiations took place and refugees from countless conflicts found shelter. They had never asked for military assistance in the 3 centuries since first contact with humanity. "Put it through," Chun commanded, her weathered hands gripping the railing before her command chair. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a being that looked like a cross between a tall, elegant bird and a humanoid figure. The Volari's normally pristine white and silver feathers were disheveled and stained with what appeared to be blue blood. Behind the alien, explosions lit up the background in sickly orange hues. "This is High Chancellor Zefkar of the Volari Collective." The being spoke, its melodious voice strained with exhaustion and terror. "We are under assault by the Korthax Empire. They came without warning, without provocation. Our defense fleet has been destroyed. Civilian evacuation ships are being hunted down and eliminated. We estimate less than 48 hours before complete planetary annihilation." The transmission wavered, static bleeding through as another explosion rocked whatever structure the Chancellor was broadcasting from. When the image cleared, tears were visible in the alien's large, crystalline eyes. "We have never asked for military aid before, but we have nowhere else to turn. The Galactic Council forces are too far away. Please, if any species receives this message and has the capability to respond, we beg for assistance. The Korthax show no mercy. They are exterminating us systematically. We have approximately 2 million civilians who cannot be evacuated. If someone doesn't help us..." The transmission cut to static. Admiral Chin stood in silence for a long moment, processing what they had just witnessed. The Volari had been humanity's first alien allies, the species that had vouched for Earth's admission to the Galactic Council despite opposition from more militaristic races. They had shared technology, culture, and friendship for generations. "Time to Valaris Prime at maximum burn?" Chun asked without turning from the screen. 72 hours with the fleet's current configuration, came the immediate response from the navigation officer. "Too long," Chun muttered. She activated her personal communicator. "Give me fleet command on priority Alpha channel." Within minutes, the stern face of Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb appeared on her private screen. His expression was grim, indicating he had already received the transmission. "Admiral Chun, I assume you're calling about the Volari situation." "Yes, sir. We need to respond immediately. The Volari are our allies." Webb's expression darkened. "Sarah, I understand the emotional component here, but we need to consider the strategic implications. The Korthax Empire has the largest military force in this sector. Their ships are powerful, their weapons advanced. Engaging them could mean all-out war. With respect, sir, the Volari saved Earth during the Zephyrian crisis. Without their intervention, humanity would have been wiped out before we even reached the stars. We owe them. Debt doesn't win space battles, Admiral. The Korthax have been expanding aggressively for decades. Intelligence suggests they have over 2,000 ships in their assault fleet. We have 400 ships in the Third Fleet, and they're scattered across 12 systems." Chin's eyes blazed with determination. "Then we gather them all. Every ship, every weapon, every human willing to fight. The Volari taught us that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds." Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Chin's face through the transmission. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, he nodded slowly. I'll give you 60 hours to assemble whatever force you can. But, Chun, understand this. If you fail, if the Korthax defeat our fleet, Earth itself may become their next target. Understood, sir. But, if we let the Volari die while we do nothing, we'll have already lost what makes us human. The transmission ended, and Chun immediately turned to her communications officer. Send coded messages to every human ship within a 6-hour jump radius. Priority Alpha protocols. We're assembling the largest fleet in human history. Admiral, her executive officer, Commander Rodriguez, approached cautiously. With respect, even if we gather every available ship, we'll still be outnumbered 5-1. Chun turned to face her second-in-command, and Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that made him step back involuntarily. It was a cold fire, the kind of determination that had driven humanity from the caves to the stars. Commander, there's something the other species in the galaxy don't understand about humans. We didn't evolve on a paradise world like the Volari or in underground cities like the Morlocks. We evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless predators that made us prey. She moved to the tactical display, bringing up Earth's historical files. Images of ancient battles, world wars, and conflicts that had shaped humanity flashed across the screen. Every other species in the galaxy evolved as either predator or prey. We evolved as something else entirely. We became persistence hunters, creatures that never stop, never quit, never accept defeat. The Volari called us Deathworlders when they first met us, and they meant it as a compliment. Today, the Korthax are going to learn why that term terrifies half the galaxy. Over the next 6 hours, Chun watched with growing satisfaction as her fleet assembled. It started with the ships already in nearby systems: heavy cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. But as word spread through unofficial channels, something unprecedented began to happen. Human merchant vessels began arriving, their cargo holds converted to weapon bays. Mining ships appeared with industrial-grade cutting lasers mounted on improvised weapon platforms. Even scientific research vessels showed up, their peaceful exploration equipment replaced with whatever weapons their crews could acquire. Dr. Elizabeth Warren arrived aboard the research vessel Newton, her usual academic composure replaced by steely resolve. She requested immediate audience with Admiral Chun. Admiral, my ship wasn't designed for combat, but my crew and I have been working on theoretical applications of our planetary bombardment prevention systems. We believe we can reverse the polarity and create focused gravitic disruption fields. Chun raised an eyebrow. In layman's terms, Doctor, we can create localized gravity wells that will tear apart any ship caught in their field. It's completely untested in combat, but the mathematical models are sound. How many ships could you disable? If our calculations are correct, potentially dozens simultaneously. But, Admiral, there's a significant risk. If the field destabilizes, it could destroy our own ship as well. Chun nodded grimly. Add your ship to the scientific support squadron. We'll need every advantage we can get. The most unexpected arrival came in the form of the Redemption, a former prison transport that had been converted by its crew of former convicts into something that barely qualified as a warship. Its captain, a grizzled ex-military man named Jake Sullivan, who had been court-martialed for refusing illegal orders, requested permission to join the fleet. Admiral, my crew knows we're probably not coming back from this, but we've all got debts to pay, and the Volari helped more than a few of us find redemption when the rest of the galaxy wouldn't give us a chance. Chun found herself accepting crews and ships she would have never considered in normal circumstances. Mercenaries, pirates who had been granted amnesty, civilian volunteers with no military training but unshakable determination. The fleet swelled to nearly 800 vessels of varying sizes and capabilities. But it was the arrival of the Vengeance that truly changed everything. The massive dreadnought had been Earth's secret weapon, a ship so advanced and powerful that its very existence was classified. Admiral Chun had not expected Fleet Command to authorize its deployment. Fleet Admiral Webb himself appeared on the communication screen. Admiral Chun, you've managed to assemble the most diverse and unpredictable fleet in human history. Command has decided that if you're going to face impossible odds, you might as well have our most impossible weapon. The Vengeance was a testament to human engineering and the hard lessons learned from centuries of warfare. Unlike the sleek, elegant designs favored by other species, human ships looked like what they were: weapons of war. The Vengeance bristled with weapon emplacements, armor plating, and redundant systems designed to keep fighting even when severely damaged. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Morrison aboard the Vengeance. "My crew and I are honored to serve under your command. We've all heard about the Volari situation. Command gave us full authorization to utilize any weapon systems necessary." Chun felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what Captain Morrison was implying. The Vengeance carried weapons that had been banned by galactic treaty, weapons so devastating that their use was considered a crime against all sentient life. But if they were facing complete genocide of an entire species? "Captain Morrison, let's hope we don't need to cross that line." "Yes, ma'am. But if we do, my crew is prepared." As the final ships arrived and the fleet prepared for departure, Chin addressed her captains from the bridge of the Prometheus. Nearly 800 faces looked back at her through communication screens, representing every walk of human life. Captains, crew members, and volunteers of the Human Liberation Fleet. She began, her voice carrying across space to every ship. "What we're about to attempt has never been done before. We're going to take a hastily assembled fleet of mismatched ships against the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy." Murmurs began among the crews, but Chin raised her hand for silence. "The odds are against us. Many of us will not return. But I want you to remember why we're here. The Volari saved Earth when we were nothing but a species taking our first steps into space. They taught us that the galaxy could be more than a place of endless war and conquest. They showed us that different species could work together, learn from each other, and build something better." Her voice rose, carrying the passion that had driven humanity to the stars. Today, the Korthax Empire believes they can exterminate an entire peaceful species simply because they can. They believe that might makes right, that the strong can destroy the weak without consequence. They're about to learn that they're wrong. Chin paused, looking out at the assembled fleet through the view screen. Ships of every size and design floated in formation, their running lights creating a constellation of defiance against the darkness of space. Humanity has faced extinction before. We've stared into the abyss of our own annihilation and refused to blink. We've survived plagues, wars, natural disasters, and threats from beyond our world. We've done it not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. We've done it because when faced with the choice between giving up and fighting against impossible odds, we choose to fight. The communications channels erupted in cheers and battle cries from hundreds of ships. "Fleet Command, this is Admiral Chun. The Human Liberation Fleet is assembled and ready for departure. We jump for Valaris Prime in 1 hour. May whatever gods watch over us have mercy on our souls, because we're about to show the galaxy that humanity will never abandon its friends." As the fleet prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Chin privately wondered if she was leading her people to salvation or destruction. But as she looked at the determination in her crew's faces and felt the solidarity radiating from the fleet around her, she knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The Korthax Empire was about to encounter something they had never faced before, a species that had evolved in hell and learned to call it home. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing all the fury and determination that had carried them from a single small planet to the stars themselves. In the depths of space, 800 ships aligned themselves for the jump that would either save the Volari Collective or mark the beginning of humanity's greatest war. Admiral Chun took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. Destination, Valaris Prime. Operation, Liberation. The stars stretched into lines of light, and humanity's greatest fleet vanished into the void, racing toward a battle that would define the future of the galaxy. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valaris system like a swarm of angry hornets emerging from their nest. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, her eyes fixed on the tactical display that painted a picture of systematic destruction. What she saw made her blood run cold. Valaris Prime, the beautiful garden world that had once been a beacon of peace in the galaxy, was burning. Massive orbital bombardment platforms hung in space like mechanical vultures, their weapons raining death upon the surface below. The planet's atmosphere was choked with smoke and debris from destroyed cities. But it was the smaller signatures on the scanner that truly enraged Chun. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres called out, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I'm reading multiple Korthax hunter-killer squadrons pursuing civilian evacuation ships. They're not even trying to capture them. They're just destroying everything that moves." Chun watched as the tactical display showed a Valari hospital ship, clearly marked with medical symbols, being systematically torn apart by Korthax fighters. The ship's desperate evasive maneuvers were futile against the overwhelming firepower. As she watched, the hospital ship's signal disappeared from the screen. "How many civilian ships are still in system?" Chen asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Approximately 43 vessels of various sizes. Most are damaged and low on power. The Korthax appear to be hunting them for sport." Chen's hands clenched into fists. She had seen warfare before, had fought in brutal campaigns against pirates and hostile species. But this wasn't warfare. This was extermination for the sake of cruelty. "Commander Rodriguez, signal the fleet. Emergency Deployment Pattern 7. All fast attack craft are to immediately engage the hunter-killer squadrons. Main battle groups will move to intercept the orbital bombardment platforms." "We in this now." "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station. "Incoming transmission from the Korthax flagship." "Put it through." The view screen shifted to show a being that embodied everything humans had learned to fear about predator species. The Korthax admiral was easily 8 feet tall, covered in black chitinous armor that seemed to absorb light. Its 4 arms each ended in clawed hands that looked capable of tearing through steel. But it was the creature's eyes that truly disturbed Chun. They held an intelligence that made its actions even more horrifying. "I am War Prime Vexthor of the Korthax subjugation fleet." The alien spoke, its voice like grinding metal. "You will identify yourselves and withdraw immediately. This system is claimed by the Korthax Empire." Chun stepped forward, her relatively small human frame dwarfed by the alien on the screen. But her presence filled the bridge with authority that even the alien seemed to recognize. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Federation. You will immediately cease your attack on the Valari civilians and withdraw from this system." The Korthax admiral's mandibles clicked in what Chun realized was laughter. "Humans, the little primates from the death world? You are far from home, Admiral. Return to your mudball before we add humanity to our list of conquered species." "Last warning," Chun replied, her voice carrying a tone that made even her own crew shift nervously. "Cease your attacks and withdraw." "Or what?" Vexthor sneered. "Your pathetic fleet of merchant vessels and civilian ships will stop us? We have conquered 17 species in this sector alone. Your 800 ships against our 2,000 is not even an interesting challenge." Chun smiled, and Lieutenant Torres later swore it was the most terrifying expression he had ever seen on a human face. "War Prime Vexthor, you're about to learn the difference between conquest and survival. Humanity didn't crawl to the top of our food chain by being reasonable." She cut the transmission and immediately turned to her tactical officer. "All ships, weapons free. Rules of engagement. Any Korthax vessel that does not immediately withdraw is considered hostile. Show them what happens when Deathworlders stop playing nice." The battle began with humanity's lighter ships screaming toward the Korthax hunter-killer squadrons like missiles with a personal vendetta. The human fighters were smaller and theoretically less powerful than their Korthax counterparts, but they had been designed by a species that understood that survival often depended on being nastier than your opponent. Captain Lisa Park, commanding the destroyer Relentless, led the first wave against a squadron of Korthax fighters that had been terrorizing Volari evacuation ships. Her ship dove through the enemy formation like a striking serpent, its weapons tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Target the lead fighter, she commanded her weapons officer. Full spread of penetrator missiles. The missiles streaked across space, but instead of impacting the Korthax ship's shields as expected, they passed through them completely. The Korthax pilot had barely enough time to register confusion before the missiles struck his ship's hull directly. The human weapons had been designed with adaptive frequency modulation, allowing them to match and pass through enemy shield harmonics. The Korthax fighter exploded in a brilliant ball of fire, taking two of its wingmates with it in the explosion. Captain Park's ship was already moving to the next target before the debris had finished spreading. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human ships engaged their enemies with a ferocity that shocked both allies and enemies. The humans fought like they had learned to fight on their home world, with overwhelming aggression, tactical flexibility, and a complete disregard for conventional rules of engagement. Dr. Warren's research vessel Newton had positioned itself behind the main battle line, its experimental gravitational weapons beginning to charge. She watched as her instruments detected massive Korthax battleships moving to intercept the human main fleet. Targeting the lead battleship, she announced to her civilian crew, most of whom were scientists with no combat training. Remember, if this works, we've just revolutionized space warfare. If it doesn't work, we'll be vaporized before we know it. The Newton unleashed its gravitational field manipulators, creating localized gravity wells directly in the path of three Korthax battleships. The massive vessels, unable to change course quickly enough, found themselves caught in gravitational forces that their engines couldn't overcome. The first battleship tried to reverse thrust, but the artificial gravity well increased its pull exponentially. Metal groaned and buckled as the ship was compressed by forces typically found near stellar objects. Within seconds, the mighty warship collapsed in on itself like a crushed can. The second battleship attempted to go around the gravity well, but its course correction brought it too close to the field's edge. The ship was caught in the gravitational gradient and began spinning out of control. Its weapons fired wildly as the crew lost all control, several shots hitting their own fleet before the ship was finally torn apart by tidal forces. The third battleship managed to halt its advance, but found itself trapped. Every attempt to move forward increased the gravitational pull, while retreat was blocked by its own fleet. Dr. Warren, her communications officer, called out, "The Admiral is requesting immediate replication of your field effect across the entire battlefront." Warren looked at her exhausted team, then at the readings showing the massive power drain on her ship's systems. "Tell the Admiral we can give her 5 more shots before our reactor core goes critical. Make them count." Meanwhile, the Vengeance had engaged the main Korthax battle line with devastating effectiveness. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge like an avenging angel, directing the deployment of weapons that the Galactic Council had banned for good reason. "Deploy the quantum disruptors," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Target their command ships' shield generators." The quantum disruptors were weapons that attacked matter at the subatomic level, causing molecular bonds to fail catastrophically. The beam struck the Korthax flagship shields, but instead of being absorbed or deflected, they passed through the energy barriers and began attacking the ship's hull directly. War Prime Vexthor watched in horror as sections of his ship simply ceased to exist at the molecular level. The quantum disruptors were creating holes in his vessel that couldn't be repaired because the matter that had been there was no longer just destroyed, it had been uncreated. "What are those weapons?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown technology, War Prime. Our shields provide no protection." The beams appeared to disrupt matter itself. Vexthor felt something he had never experienced in decades of conquest: fear. The humans were fighting with weapons that violated everything he understood about conventional warfare. But the true horror came when the human fleet's coordination became apparent. Unlike the rigid command structures used by most military species, the humans fought with an organic flexibility that made them impossible to predict. Small groups of ships would suddenly break formation to pursue specific targets, while others would combine their firepower in devastating coordinated strikes. Captain Sullivan's redemption, crewed by former convicts and outcasts, exemplified this chaotic effectiveness. Sullivan had positioned his ship to look like easy prey, a damaged vessel limping away from the main battle. When a Korthax cruiser moved to finish them off, Sullivan sprung his trap. "Now," he shouted to his crew. The Redemption's supposedly damaged sections suddenly opened to reveal concealed weapon batteries. The Korthax cruiser found itself taking fire from directions it hadn't known existed. Simultaneously, 3 human fighters that had been hiding in the Redemption's sensor shadow attacked from above, their weapons targeting the cruiser's engine systems. The Korthax ship, caught completely off guard, lost propulsion and began spinning helplessly. Sullivan's crew, many of whom had learned improvised warfare in the criminal underworld, showed no mercy. They targeted the enemy ship's life support systems, forcing the crew to abandon ship or suffocate. "This is Captain Sullivan to all human vessels," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "The ex-cons and pirates are showing these alien bullies how we handle things in the bad neighborhoods. No mercy for those who hunt civilians." Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold from the Prometheus, feeling a grim satisfaction as the human fleet's unconventional tactics began to take their toll on the Korthax forces. But she also recognized that despite their initial success, the humans were still heavily outnumbered. "Tactical," she called to her officers. "What's our casualty report?" "We've lost 37 ships so far, Admiral. But Korthax losses are at over 300 vessels. Their formation is beginning to break apart." Chin nodded, but she knew the real test was yet to come. The Korthax had been caught off guard by human tactics, but they were adapting. More importantly, the orbital bombardment platforms were still operational, continuing their systematic destruction of Valaris Prime. "Signal all ships," she commanded. "Phase 2 of the operation begins now. We're going to save those bombardment platforms for last. I want the Korthax to watch as we systematically destroy their entire fleet before we stop their genocide." She opened a channel to the Korthax flagship. War Prime Vexthor's image appeared on her screen, his confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage. "Human Admiral," he snarled, "you have caught us unprepared with your primitive savagery, but we are adapting. Your small fleet cannot stand against the might of the Korthax Empire." Chun leaned forward, her eyes boring into the aliens. "War Prime, you made 2 critical errors today. First, you assumed that being outnumbered would discourage us. Humans are used to being outnumbered. We've been the underdog in every fight we've ever won." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "Second, you decided to wage war against civilians. That wasn't a tactical decision. That was personal. And when humans take something personally, we don't just win. We make sure the lesson is never forgotten." The transmission ended, and Chun turned to her fleet commanders. "All ships, prepare for full assault. No Korthax vessel leaves this system intact. Today, the galaxy learns that humanity protects its friends." The human fleet began to move with coordinated precision that belied its hasty assembly. Ships that had never fought together operated like a single organism, their crews united by a common purpose that transcended military protocol. The Korthax were about to discover that conquering other species had not prepared them for fighting a species that had evolved to survive on a world that had tried to kill them every single day for millions of years. The Deathworlders had arrived in force, and they were angry. The space around Valaris Prime had become a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. Admiral Chen watched from the bridge of the Prometheus as her fleet systematically dismantled the Korthax Armada with ruthless efficiency. What had begun as a rescue mission had transformed into something far more significant, a demonstration that humanity would not tolerate genocide under any circumstances. Admiral, Lieutenant Torres reported, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. Korthax losses now exceed 700 vessels. Their battle formations have completely collapsed. They're trying to retreat, but our fast attack squadrons are preventing any organized withdrawal. Chen nodded grimly. The human fleet had evolved beyond its initial chaotic assembly into something that resembled a predator pack more than a military force. Individual ship commanders were making decisions based on instinct and opportunity, creating a web of destruction that the rigidly hierarchical Korthax forces couldn't counter. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communications system from the Vengeance. Admiral, requesting permission to engage the bombardment platforms. My ship has the firepower to take them out without risking the civilian population below. Negative, Captain Morrison, Chen replied, her voice carrying an edge that made her crew exchange glances. Those platforms are going to be our final message to the galaxy. I want every Korthax in this system to watch us destroy their entire fleet before we stop their genocide. When we're finished, there won't be a single enemy ship left to carry word of what happened here. Dr. Warren's voice joined the conversation from Newton. Admiral, my gravitational weapons are detecting massive structural stress in the Korthax flagship. One more focused gravity, could collapse their entire command structure. Hold position, Dr. Warren. I want War Prime Vexthor to live long enough to understand what his species has provoked. Chen opened a communication channel to the entire human fleet. Nearly 800 ship commanders looked back at her, their faces reflecting the same cold determination that had driven humanity from caves to stars. Fleet commanders, the Korthax are broken. Their formations are scattered, their command structure is failing, and their ships are fleeing in all directions. But we're not finished. Today, we're not just saving the Volari. We're sending a message that will echo across the galaxy for generations. She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of captains who had volunteered for what they all knew was likely a suicide mission. Every species in known space is going to hear about what happened at Valaris Prime. They're going to learn that when humanity's friends are threatened, we don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We don't show mercy to those who show none to innocence. We end the threat completely. Captain Sullivan's scarred face grinned from the screen of the Redemption. Admiral, my crew, and I have some suggestions for making this lesson particularly memorable. I'm listening, Captain. Well, ma'am, most of my boys learned their tactics in situations where you don't just want to fight, you make sure the other guy's friends never want to fight you again. We've been tracking Korthax escape pods and retreat vectors. What if we made sure their survivors had some very specific stories to tell when they get home? Chen considered this for a moment. In conventional warfare, allowing enemies to escape to spread fear was considered unnecessarily cruel. But this wasn't conventional warfare. This was a genocide that needed to be stopped permanently. Elaborate, Captain Sullivan. Simple, Admiral. We let some of them run. But we make sure they're running scared, and we give them something to remember us by. My crew's been working on some modifications to our tractor beams. Instead of just capturing ships, we can use them to rearrange enemy vessels in creative ways. On the tactical display, Chun watched as Sullivan's Redemption intercepted a fleeing Korthax destroyer. Instead of destroying the ship outright, the human vessel's modified tractor beam grabbed the enemy ship and began systematically tearing off its weapon systems, leaving the hull intact but completely defenseless. Creative, Captain, Chen acknowledged. All ships, new rules of engagement. Enemy vessels attempting to flee are to be disabled, not destroyed. Strip their weapons, damage their communications, but leave them capable of limping home. I want the Korthax Empire to hear first-hand accounts of what happens when they threaten our allies. The order was carried out with enthusiasm that would have disturbed peacekeeping forces throughout the galaxy. Human ships began hunting down fleeing Korthax vessels like wolves pursuing scattered prey. But instead of quick kills, they engaged in systematic humiliation of the enemy forces. Captain Parks relentless cornered a Korthax heavy cruiser attempting to escape the system. Her crew had developed their own interpretation of Chen's orders. Targeting their sensor array, her weapons officer announced. Precision strike to blind them without destroying the ship. Follow it up by targeting their engine cowlings, Park added. I want them limping home at quarter impulse, unable to see where they're going. The Korthax cruiser found itself stripped of sensors, weapons, and most of its propulsion capability. But the humans weren't finished. Captain Park ordered her communications officer to establish a link with the crippled enemy ship. Korthax vessel, this is Captain Park of the Human Federation. You're being allowed to survive so that you can carry a message back to your empire. Tell your leaders that humanity remembers every species that has shown us friendship, and we never forget those who threaten our allies. Meanwhile, War Prime Vexthor watched his mighty armada being systematically dismantled from the bridge of his flagship. The humans weren't just defeating his forces. They were humiliating them with a level of tactical creativity that defied everything he understood about warfare. War Prime, his tactical officer reported, voice shaking with terror. The humans are not following any recognizable combat doctrine. They appear to be improvising new tactics in real time, adapting to our countermeasures faster than we can implement them. Vexthor studied the battle display with growing unease. His species had conquered 17 different civilizations using standard military tactics, overwhelming force, rigid command structures, and predictable strategic objectives. The humans seemed to operate on completely different principles. Analysis, he demanded. What is the human fleet's primary objective? Unknown, War Prime. Their actions suggest multiple simultaneous objectives. Rescue of Valari civilians, destruction of our military assets, and psychological warfare against our forces. The tactical display showed human ships engaging in behaviors that made no tactical sense by Korthax standards. Some vessels were actively pursuing and disabling ships that posed no strategic threat. Others were using their weapons to carve messages into the hulls of disabled Korthax vessels. Still others were systematically destroying specific systems on enemy ships while leaving the crews alive to witness the destruction. They're playing with us, Vexthor realized with growing horror. This entire battle is a demonstration. His communications officer looked up from his console. War Prime, incoming transmission from the human admiral. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main view screen, and Vexthor was struck by the complete absence of emotion in her expression. She looked at him with the same detached interest a scientist might show when observing a particularly interesting specimen. War Prime Vexthor, she began, her voice carrying across space with absolute authority. Your fleet is destroyed. Your bombardment of Valaris Prime ends now. Human, Vexthor snarled. Try to maintain some semblance of command presence despite his desperate situation. You may have won this battle, but the Korthax Empire will not forget this insult. We will return with a larger fleet, and we will reduce your homeworld to ash. Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Vexthor's confidence waver. War Prime, I don't think you understand your situation. Your empire sent 2,000 ships to exterminate a peaceful species. Those ships are gone. Your crews are either dead or fleeing home in ships so damaged they'll barely reach Korthax base. She leaned forward slightly, and Vexthor found himself stepping back involuntarily. But, more importantly, you've demonstrated that the Korthax Empire believe genocide is an acceptable tool of conquest. That makes your entire species a threat to every peaceful civilization in the galaxy. Humanity has a very simple policy regarding threats to our friends. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Vexthor staring at a blank screen. Before he could demand an explanation from his communications officer, proximity alarms began screaming throughout his ship. The human dreadnought Vengeance had appeared directly in front of his flagship, its massive bulk blocking out the stars. Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the Korthax ship's communication system. Korthax flagship, you will immediately order all bombardment platforms to cease their attack on Valaris Prime and surrender. You have 30 seconds to comply. We will never surrender to inferior species. Vexthor roared into his communicator. 20 seconds, Morrison replied calmly. Vexthor looked at his tactical display. His flagship was the only major Korthax vessel still operational in the system. The orbital bombardment platforms were automated and would continue their work even if his ship was destroyed. Perhaps he could use this as leverage. 10 seconds. Human, if you destroy my ship, the bombardment platforms will continue their work. The Valari will still die. 5 seconds. The Vengeance opened fire, but not with the devastating quantum disruptors that had torn through Korthax ships throughout the battle. Instead, precision energy beams targeted specific systems on Vexthor's flagship. The ship's weapons were methodically destroyed, followed by its engines, then its defensive systems. Within minutes, the mighty Korthax flagship was completely helpless, its crew alive, but powerless to affect the outcome of the battle. Captain Morrison's voice returned, now carrying an edge of impatience. War Prime Vexthor, the orbital platforms will surrender now, or we will demonstrate why human weapons were banned by the Galactic Council. On his tactical display, Vexthor watched as additional human ships surrounded the bombardment platforms. But these weren't the standard warships that had decimated his fleet. These were the civilian vessels that had joined the human fleet, their cargo holds modified to carry equipment he didn't recognize. Dr. Warren's Newton positioned itself directly above the largest bombardment platform. Her gravitational weapons, which had proven so devastating against his battleships, began targeting the platform's structural supports. War Prime, Dr. Warren's voice joined the communication. My calculations show that these platforms will collapse into artificial black holes if subjected to gravitational stress beyond their design parameters. The resulting gravitational anomalies will make this entire system uninhabitable for approximately 10,000 years. Vexthor felt his biological equivalent of blood turn cold. The humans weren't just threatening to stop the bombardment. They were threatening to make the entire system uninhabitable if he didn't surrender immediately. Admiral Chun, he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance. What are your terms for ending this engagement? Chen's voice returned, carrying the same cold authority that had marked their entire conversation. Unconditional surrender of all Korthax forces in this system. Immediate cessation of all attacks on Valari civilians or infrastructure. Withdrawal of all Korthax forces from Valari space within 24 hours. And if we comply, your surviving crews will be allowed to return to Korthax space to carry word of what happened here. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity will never tolerate genocide. Vexthor looked around his bridge at his surviving officers. Fear and defeat were written across their faces in ways that decades of military discipline couldn't hide. His mighty armada had been reduced to scattered refugees in less than 6 hours by a species most of the galaxy considered primitive. I accept your terms, he said, the words tasting like poison. Surrender signal received and accepted, Admiral Chen replied. War Prime, you and your surviving forces have 12 hours to begin withdrawal from this system. I suggest you use that time wisely. As the communication ended, Vexthor slumped in his command chair. He had witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A species that fought not for conquest or glory, but for the protection of others. The humans had demonstrated a level of tactical innovation and strategic ruthlessness that made them unlike any opponent he had ever faced. But more than that, they had shown that they were willing to sacrifice everything to protect their friends. That kind of dedication made them the most dangerous enemy any aggressive species could face. On the surface of Valaris Prime, Valari civilians emerged from shelters to see the orbital bombardment finally ending. The sky which had been filled with fire and death for days, was now lit only by the distant flashes of human ships herding Korthak survivors toward the edge of the system. High Chancellor Zefkar, wounded but alive, stood among the ruins of his world's capital city and looked up at the stars where humanity had answered their desperate call for help. The Gentle Valari had learned something profound about their human allies. When Deathworlders chose to fight, they fought with a completeness that transformed the very nature of warfare itself. 3 weeks after the Battle of Valaris Prime, the galaxy was still reeling from the implications of what had occurred. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the rebuilt communication center of the Valari capital, watching as representatives from dozens of species requested audience with the human fleet. The rescue mission had become something far more significant, a fundamental shift in the galactic balance of power. High Chancellor Zefkar approached, his injuries healing, but his crystalline eyes still reflecting the trauma of what his people had endured. The Valari leader had aged visibly in the past weeks, but there was a new strength in his bearing that hadn't been there before. Admiral Chun, he began, his melodious voice carrying deep gratitude, mixed with awe. The final casualty reports have been compiled. Thanks to your fleet's intervention, over 1,800,000 Valari civilians survived. Without your arrival, our entire species would have been extinct within hours. Chun nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Chancellor, we're honored that we could help, but I'm concerned about the broader implications of what happened here. The galaxy is responding to our actions in ways we didn't anticipate. Through the facility's viewing ports, both leaders could see the organized chaos of a human fleet maintaining orbital position around Valaris Prime. What had begun as a hastily assembled rescue force had evolved into something resembling a permanent garrison. Ships that should have returned to their original duties remained in system, their crews having voted almost unanimously to maintain protection for the recovering Valari. Admiral, Chancellor Zefkar continued, we have received formal communications from 17 different species requesting similar protection agreements. The Delari Republic, the Symphonic Collective, even the isolationist Crystalline Hegemony have all expressed interest in defensive alliances with humanity. Chen's communication officer approached with a data tablet. Admiral, priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Webb wants to speak with you immediately. Chun excused herself and moved to the secure communication booth. Admiral Webb's face appeared on the screen, his expression showing a mixture of pride and deep concern. Sarah, congratulations on the most decisive military victory in human history. The casualty reports from Valaris Prime are frankly unbelievable. You destroyed over 1,700 enemy vessels while losing only 63 ships from our fleet. Thank you, sir, but I sense there's more to this communication. Webb nodded grimly. Intelligence reports are coming in from across the galaxy. The Korthak's empire is mobilizing everything they have. They're calling for a holy war against humanity. But more significantly, the other major powers are taking notice of our capabilities. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Elaborate, sir. The Hegemony Council, the Meridian Alliance, even the supposedly neutral Trading Federation are all reassessing their military capabilities in light of what you accomplished. Some are impressed. Others are terrified. A few are actively hostile. On the screen behind Webb, tactical displays showed fleet movements across multiple star systems. Ships were being repositioned, alliances were being reconsidered, and military budgets were being dramatically increased across dozens of worlds. Sarah, you saved the Valari, but you may have also triggered the largest military buildup in galactic history. Every major power is now trying to determine whether humanity is a potential ally or an existential threat. Chun considered this for a moment. Sir, what are your orders? That's complicated. Officially, Fleet Command wants you to return to Earth for debriefing and reassignment. Unofficially, Webb paused, glancing around his office. Unofficially, half the Galactic Council is requesting human military advisors. The other half is demanding we be censured for using banned weapons and excessive force. And what do you think we should do? Webb leaned back in his chair, looking older than Chun had ever seen him. "Sarah, in 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like what your fleet accomplished. You took a collection of volunteers and misfits and turned them into the most effective fighting force in known space. But effectiveness in warfare often comes with political consequences." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent signal from Chen's tactical officer. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Configuration and approach vectors suggest Korthax reinforcements." Chun immediately returned to the command center, where Chancellor Zefkar was studying incoming sensor data with obvious alarm. "How many ships?" Chun asked her tactical officer. "Initial count suggests over 3,000 vessels, Admiral. This is significantly larger than their original attack fleet." Chun opened communication channels to her fleet commanders. The faces that appeared on her screens now carried the confidence of veterans who had already proven themselves against impossible odds. "Fleet commanders, we have incoming Korthax forces. Preliminary analysis suggests they've committed everything they have to this engagement." Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communication from the Vengeance. "Admiral, my crew is ready. After what we witnessed them do to the Volari civilians, I don't think anyone in this fleet has any interest in showing mercy a second time." Dr. Warren joined the conversation from a research vessel. "Admiral, my team has been working on improvements to our gravitational weapons based on data from the previous engagement. We can now create stable gravity wells that will persist for several hours after deployment." Captain Sullivan's scarred face grinned from the Redemption. "Admiral, my boys have been sharing combat techniques with crews from other ships. I think you'll find this fleet is considerably more dangerous than it was 3 weeks ago." But it was the voice of Captain Lisa Park from the Relentless that carried the most significant information. "Admiral, I need to report something that changes our tactical situation dramatically. We've been monitoring Korthax communications, and this isn't just a revenge attack." Chun felt her blood chill. "Explain, Captain Park." "Ma'am, intelligence analysis of captured Korthax transmissions indicates this fleet carries planet-killer weapons. They're not planning to retake Valaris Prime. They're planning to sterilize it completely, along with any human ships in the system." The communication channel fell silent as the implications sank in. The Korthax weren't returning for conquest. They were coming for complete annihilation. Chancellor Zefkar stepped forward, his melodious voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone present. "Admiral Chun, the Volari Collective formally requests that you withdraw your fleet immediately. We will not allow humanity to sacrifice itself for our survival a second time." Chun looked at the Volari leader with respect, but her expression remained determined. "Chancellor, with respect, that decision isn't yours to make. This fleet consists of volunteers who understood the risks when they signed up." She opened the communication channel to address her entire fleet. "All ships, all crews, you've now heard the intelligence report. The incoming Korthax fleet outnumbers us 4-1 and carries weapons designed to sterilize entire planets. Any ship that wants to withdraw has permission to do so immediately." For several long seconds, the communication channel remained silent. Then, Captain Morrison spoke for all of them. "Admiral, the crew of the Vengeance votes to stay. We didn't come this far to run when things get difficult." "The Relentless concurs," Captain Park added. "Newton staying put," Dr. Warren confirmed. One by one, every ship in the fleet reported their decision to remain and fight. Not a single vessel requested permission to withdraw. Chun felt a surge of pride that was immediately followed by the crushing weight of responsibility. She was about to lead nearly 800 ships and their crews into a battle against overwhelming odds, where defeat would mean not just their deaths, but the complete destruction of an entire species. "Fleet commanders, we have approximately 6 hours before the Korthax fleet arrives. We're going to use that time to prepare the most comprehensive defensive operation in human history." Over the next several hours, the human fleet transformed itself from a collection of individual ships into a unified defense network that utilized every lesson learned from centuries of human warfare. Ships positioned themselves in overlapping fields of fire, with smaller vessels hidden in the sensor shadows of larger ones. Minefields were deployed using improvised explosives created from civilian cargo. But the most significant preparation came from an unexpected source. The Volari, despite their pacifist nature, began providing intelligence and logistical support that proved invaluable. Admiral Chancellor Zefkar reported, "Our surviving sensor networks have detected that the Korthax fleet is using a formation designed specifically for planetary bombardment. Their heavy weapons platforms are positioned in the center of the formation, protected by escort vessels. Can your people identify which ships carry the planet-killer weapons?" "Yes. We're transmitting targeting data now. Admiral, there are 12 ships in their fleet carrying weapons capable of cracking a planet's crust." Chun studied the incoming intelligence data. 12 ships scattered throughout a formation of 3,000 vessels. Destroying those specific targets while under attack from overwhelming enemy forces would require precision and coordination beyond anything her fleet had yet attempted. "Dr. Warren, can your gravitational weapons target multiple ships simultaneously?" "Theoretically, yes. But the power requirements would drain our entire reactor core. It would be a one-shot capability." Chun made her decision with the cold calculation that had carried humanity to the stars. All ships, new mission parameters. Primary objective is the destruction of the 12 planet-killer vessels. Secondary objectives are engagement and elimination of escort vessels. We're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're performing surgery on their fleet. When the Korthax Armada dropped out of hyperspace, they found a human fleet waiting in a formation that defied conventional military doctrine. Instead of a traditional battle line, the human ships were scattered across the system in what appeared to be random positions. To Korthax commanders trained in standard military tactics, it looked like the humans had panicked and lost all coordination. War Commander Torvak, Vexthor's replacement, studied the tactical display with satisfaction. "The humans are disorganized and outnumbered. We will destroy them in the opening engagement, then proceed with the sterilization of Valaris Prime." His tactical officer looked uncertain. "War Commander, intelligence reports from our previous engagement suggest the humans utilize unconventional tactics." "Our previous commanders were incompetent," Torvak snarled. "We have overwhelming numerical superiority and weapons the humans cannot counter. Begin the attack." The Korthax fleet advanced in perfect formation, their heavy weapons platforms surrounded by protective escorts. It was exactly the kind of rigid, predictable approach that human military doctrine was designed to exploit. Admiral Chun watched the enemy advance from the bridge of the Prometheus, her expression calm despite the overwhelming odds. "All ships, execute Operation Deathworld. Show them what happens when you corner a species that evolved to survive anything." The human fleet erupted into action with a coordination that seemed impossible given their scattered positions. Ships that had appeared to be randomly distributed suddenly revealed themselves to be components of a three-dimensional web designed to channel the Korthax fleet into kill zones. The battle began with Dr. Warren's Newton creating the largest gravitational anomaly ever generated by human technology. Instead of targeting individual ships, the research vessel created a massive gravity well directly in the path of the Korthax formation. The enemy fleet found their advance suddenly, disrupted as ships were pulled off course by forces they couldn't see or understand. In the chaos that followed, human ships struck with surgical precision. Captain Parks, relentless, led a squadron of destroyers through the gap in the Korthax formation, their weapons targeting the first planet-killer vessel with focused fire that ignored everything else in their path. Captain Morrison's Vengeance engaged the Korthax flagship with weapons that had been banned throughout the galaxy for good reason. Quantum disruptors tore through the enemy ship's defenses while molecular destabilizers attacked its hull at the atomic level. But it was Captain Sullivan's redemption that provided the engagement's most memorable moment. His ship, crewed by former criminals and outcasts, had been modified with equipment acquired through methods that weren't entirely legal. When a Korthax heavy cruiser moved to intercept them, Sullivan deployed a weapon that his crew had developed from stolen mining equipment. "Eat this, you genocidal bastards," Sullivan announced as a ship fired a stream of crystallized antimatter directly into the enemy vessel's reactor core. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. The battle raged for 18 hours, with human ships demonstrating levels of tactical flexibility and strategic innovation that transformed the very nature of space warfare. They fought like they had learned to fight on Earth, with overwhelming aggression, tactical adaptation, and complete commitment to victory regardless of the cost. When the final Korthax vessel either surrendered or fled, the human fleet had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had defeated an enemy force 4 times their size, while successfully protecting every planet-killer weapon from being deployed. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, looking out at the debris field that had once been the largest invasion fleet in Korthax history. Her fleet had lost 137 ships, but they had saved not just the Volari, but potentially dozens of other species that would have been the Korthax Empire's next targets. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Representatives from over 40 species are requesting immediate audience." Shin nodded, understanding that the events at Valaris Prime had changed everything. Humanity had announced its arrival as a major galactic power in the most dramatic way possible. "Chancellor Zefkar," she said to the Volari leader, "what happens next is up to all of us. But I can promise you this. Humanity will never forget its friends, and will never tolerate threats to innocent life." As news of the Battle of Valaris Prime spread across the galaxy, it carried a message that resonated through every star system. The Deathworlders had evolved beyond their home planet, and they had brought their survival instincts with them to the stars. Any species that threatened peaceful civilizations would now have to contend with humans who had learned that the best defense of freedom was the complete destruction of those who would take it away. The galaxy would never be the same. And for species like the Volari, that was exactly what they had hoped for when they first reached out to the small blue planet whose inhabitants refused to accept defeat.